She drank to forget her pain, but the Mafia boss saved her from more trouble. The whiskey tasted like rust and regret, but Alyssa Carter drank it anyway. It was 2:45 in the morning. The last call at the Rusty Anchor had been nearly an hour ago, but Alyssa was still sitting on a bar stool, her own bar stool, the one she usually served drinks from. Her shift had technically ended, but she was the only one left besides Sal, the owner, who was clanging glasses into a sanitizer rack in the back, pointedly ignoring her. She was 28 years old, though in the bar's dim, smoke-tinged light, she looked older. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy knot that had escaped its elastic hours ago. Her black work polo was rumpled, the apron stained with something she vaguely remembered was ranch dressing, now discarded on the stool beside her. She stared into the amber liquid, the last 2 fingers in the glass, and saw nothing but the bottom. This was her life now. A cycle of serving, cleaning, and drinking. The spiraling had started 3 months ago, but the freefall began 2 weeks back. The whiskey was just a symptom. The disease was Mark. She closed her eyes, and his voice was right there, slick and reasonable. "You're too sensitive. Lisa, that's your problem. You overreact." It had started small. Criticisms of her clothes, the friends she had, the way she laughed. Then it was her job. Then it was her. He hadn't hit her, not with his hands. He used words, used silence, used the weight of her own self-doubt until she felt paper thin. He'd convinced her that the tiny apartment they shared was his, that her paycheck was supplemental, that her dreams were childish. The flashback hit her with the force of the cheap whiskey, the argument, the final one. She hadn't overreacted. She'd finally reacted. She'd found the text to another woman, 3 other women, actually, and she had packed a bag. "You're leaving?" Mark had laughed, standing in the doorway, blocking her exit. "Where are you gonna go? You're nothing without me. You're useless." He'd taken her key. He'd thrown her bag into the apartment hallway, not the street. It was quieter that way, less dramatic, more manipulative. By the time she realized he'd already changed the lock, she was sitting on the curb at midnight with a duffel bag and her work uniform and a backpack. The deposit, the rent, it had all been in his name. She'd trusted him. She had nothing. She'd been staying at the Starlight Motel, a neon-buzzed hellhole that cost $70 a night. Cash. Her savings, what little she had, were gone. Her paycheck was dust before it hit her account. Alyssa opened her eyes and swallowed the rest of the whiskey. The burn was familiar. It was the only thing that felt like hers anymore. "All right, Alyssa, I'm locking up." Sal grunted from the back room. "Yeah, okay." Her voice was rough. She slid off the stool, her knees weak. "And Lisa," he called out, his voice tired. Don't bother coming in tomorrow. Take a few days. You look like hell." He meant she was fired. She knew it. Drinking at her own bar, scaring off the last few regulars with her hollow eyes. She was a liability. "Fine," she muttered, grabbing her thin jacket. She didn't have the energy to argue or beg. She pushed open the heavy front door, ignoring Sal's sigh, and stepped out into the humid night air. The street was empty, the lamps casting a sickly orange glow. She turned toward the alley, the shortcut to the bus stop, though she knew the last bus had already run. She'd walked the 2 miles to the motel. Hey, sweetness. Hold up." Alyssa froze. The voice was thick with beer. 3 men were stumbling out of the side door, the one Sal was supposed to have locked. They were regulars, construction workers who always tipped badly and tried to grab her hand when she gave them change. "Bar's closed, guys," she said, pulling her jacket tighter. "Come on, we just want to talk," the biggest one said, grinning, showing a gap in his teeth. "You looked lonely in there." They fanned out, blocking her path back to the street. "I'm not interested," Alyssa said, her heart starting a low, heavy drumbeat. "Oh, you're not interested," another one mocked. "Too good for us?" She turned to go deeper into the alley, toward the back street, but the third man cut her off. She was boxed in. The smell of stale beer and cheap cologne washed over her. "Just be nice," the leader said, stepping closer. He put a heavy hand on her shoulder. Alyssa flinched violently. It wasn't the touch, it was the assumption. The entitlement, the way Mark used to grab her chin. "Look at me when I'm talking to you." "Get off me," she hissed, shoving his hand away. His face changed. The drunken friendliness vanished, replaced by a hard, ugly anger. Feisty. I like that. He grabbed her arm hard and shoved her back against the brick wall. The rough surface scratched her scalp. Panic, cold and absolute, flooded her system. She opened her mouth to scream, but her throat closed. This was it. This was the bottom, the useless, broken thing Mark always said she was. A car door closed. It wasn't a slam. It was a heavy, weighted thunk. The sound of expensive engineering. The men paused. The leader, still holding her arm, looked over his shoulder toward the mouth of the alley. A man stood there, silhouetted against the orange streetlight. He was tall, but it was his stillness that was terrifying. He was dressed in a suit so dark it seemed to absorb the light. It was perfectly tailored, emphasizing broad shoulders and a narrow waist. He looked to be in his mid-30s, his dark hair cut sharp and close, his jawline like something carved from granite. He just stood there, watching. "What do you want, buddy?" the leader of the drunks snarled, trying to reclaim his dominance. "This is a private party. Get lost." The man in the suit didn't move. He just looked at the hand gripping Alyssa's arm. I said, "Get lost." The man in the suit took one step into the alley. He moved with a liquid, predatory grace. He wasn't in a hurry. He didn't have to be. The drunk, fueled by alcohol and stupidity, let go of Alyssa and lunged at the newcomer. "I'll teach you." It was over before Alyssa could blink. The man in the suit didn't throw a punch. He simply pivoted, caught the drunk's lunging arm, and twisted. There was a sound, a wet, sickening snap. The drunk screamed, a high-pitched sound of agony that echoed off the brick. Clutching his wrist, it was hanging at an angle that was fundamentally wrong. The other two men, sobered instantly by the sound, backed away, their hands up. "We don't want no trouble," one of them stammered. The man in the suit didn't even look at them. He was looking at Alyssa. His eyes were dark, intense, and utterly unreadable. He hadn't drawn a weapon. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't even broken a sweat. The sheer, coiled violence radiating from him was more effective than any gun. "Take him," the man in the suit said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "And don't come back to this neighborhood." The two men scrambled, grabbing their howling friend, and fled down the alley, disappearing onto the street. The silence that fell was heavier than the confrontation had been. Alyssa was sliding down the wall, her legs refusing to hold her. She was shaking, but not from fear of the men who had run. It was the man who had stayed. He adjusted the cuff of his left sleeve, a fractional movement. He looked at her, his gaze sweeping over her torn jacket, her trembling hands, her defeated eyes. "You're bleeding," he said. It wasn't concern. It was an observation. She touched the back of her head. Her fingers came away wet. She'd hit it harder than she thought. "I'm fine," she whispered, the words tasting like ash. She wasn't grateful. She was terrified. She had traded 3 drunken idiots for one calm, collected monster. Men were the problem. All of them. He watched her, his expression cold. "You need to get home." He reached into his pocket. She flinched. Thinking it was a weapon, he pulled out a white, folded handkerchief. He didn't offer it. He tossed it lightly, and it landed in her lap. "I don't have a home," she said. The admission ripped from her. The whiskey, the adrenaline, the despair, it all crested. He looked at the black SUV parked at the curb, its tinted windows reflecting the dead street. "Where are you staying?" "Why do you care?" she spat, trying to find some fight. "I don't," he said flatly. "But you're a mess, and you're in my way." He was waiting for his driver. She realized this was his territory. He wasn't a savior. He was just cleaning the trash from his doorstep. "I'll walk," she said, pushing herself up on shaky legs. "Don't be stupid." He gestured to the SUV. "My driver will take you." "No." She shook her head, dizzy. "I'm not getting in a car with you." He sighed, a sound of profound impatience. He took a step toward her. She pressed herself back against the wall, her breath catching. He stopped. He saw the genuine animal terror in her eyes. It was a terror that went deeper than the alley. It was old. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, his voice clipped. "That's what they all say." She mumbled. The world was starting to tilt. The orange light of the street lamp was smearing. The adrenaline crash was coming, and the whiskey was rising to meet it. I'm just... She didn't want to faint. It was the ultimate weakness. But the ground was rushing up to meet her. She saw the man in the suit start to move, his face impassive, and then the world went black. Dominic Vascari caught her before her head hit the pavement. She was light, disturbingly so. Like a bird, he held her for a moment, annoyed. This was not his business. He was on his way home from a meeting that had involved high-stakes numbers and thinly veiled threats. He did not deal with common street trash, drunk waitresses or alley fights. He should have left her. Let his driver, Marco, call an ambulance. But he looked down at her face, slack in unconsciousness. She was pale, with dark circles under her eyes. He saw the scrape on her cheekbone from the wall. He saw the worn-through soles of her cheap black sneakers. He remembered the look in her eyes before she passed out. Not fear. That was there. Yes. But underneath it was a terrifying, hollow emptiness. It was the look of someone who had already given up. Boss? Marco was at his side, his face carefully neutral. Dominic cursed under his breath. "Open the door." He lifted her, one arm under her knees, one supporting her back. He dumped her unceremoniously into the back of the plush Escalade, climbed in the other side, and shut the door. "The clinic?" Marco asked, getting behind the wheel. Dominic looked at her. If he took her to his clinic, doctor, Russo would ask questions. If he took her to a hospital, the police would ask questions. He hated questions. "No," Dominic said, loosening his tie. "The penthouse." Marco's eyes met his in the rearview mirror for a fraction of a second. "Yes, boss." The ride was silent. The woman, Alyssa. He'd heard the drunk caller. Didn't stir. He watched her. He didn't know why he'd done it. It was sloppy. It was a risk. He didn't take risks. But something about her vulnerability. No, it wasn't that. It was her defiance. The way she'd refused him. Even when she had nothing, it was stupid, but it was interesting. When they arrived at the private underground garage, he carried her himself into the elevator that opened directly into his apartment. The penthouse was vast, minimalist, and cold, all glass, steel, and black leather. He walked past a $10,000 sofa and laid her on it. He took off her sneakers, dropping them on the marble floor with a faint sound of disgust. He grabbed a cashmere throw from the back of a chair, a blanket that cost more than she probably made in 3 months, and draped it over her. He looked at the scrape on her head. It had stopped bleeding. He went to his bar, poured a glass of water, grabbed a small first aid kit from his bathroom, and set them on the glass coffee table beside her. He didn't touch her. He didn't sit. He went to the window, which overlooked the entire glittering, dying city. He stared out, watching the first hints of gray light touch the horizon, and tried to forget the feeling of her, light as air, broken, in his arms. Alyssa woke up with a gasp. Her head was pounding, a thick, furry pain that started behind her eyes and radiated down her neck. Her mouth was dry, and she was not in her motel room. She was on a leather couch. The blanket over her was softer than anything she had ever touched. She sat up too fast, and the room spun. It was a massive room, with windows for walls, showing a panoramic view of the city waking up. The furniture was sleek, expensive, and empty. Oh, God! Panic seized her. Her hands flew to her clothes. Her polo was still on, rumpled, her jeans. She was wearing socks. Her shoes were on the floor by the couch. She'd been undressed. No, just her shoes. Did you, she whispered, scrambling off the couch. Did I what? The voice came from the kitchen area. The man from the alley. He was there, leaning against a stainless steel counter, drinking coffee from a black mug. He was wearing a fresh suit, this one a sharp charcoal gray. He looked like he'd already slept 8 hours and run a corporation. Did you touch me? Alyssa demanded, her voice shaking. Dominic Vascari looked at her over the rim of his mug. He took a slow sip. I took your shoes off. You were on my couch. You're welcome." His voice was devoid of warmth. She felt a flush of humiliation, then anger. "Where am I? What do you want?" "You're in my apartments," he said, as if it were obvious, "and I want you to leave. You're staining the leather." Alyssa looked down. She hadn't, but the insult stung. "I didn't ask for your help," she said, grabbing her sneakers. "I'm aware." He walked over to a small table near the door and picked something up. He walked back, stopping a good 10 feet away from her. He held out a crisp $50 bill for a cab. She stared at the money. It was charity. It was pity. It was control. She snatched the money from his hand. "I don't need your help." "Clearly." He then held out a business card. It was thick, heavy white stock, embossed with black letters. It just said Dominic Viscari and a phone number. No title. No company. She looked at the card, then at him. "What is this for? So I can thank you?" "It's so you can stay out of my way," he said. "If you're in trouble, call that number. Not me. Someone will handle it. I don't like messes in my neighborhood." He was buying her off, paying for her silence about the alley, about the wrist he'd broken. She snatched the card, too. "Fine." She jammed her feet into her sneakers, not bothering with the laces, and ran for the door. It was a massive slab of dark wood. She fumbled with the handle. "It's the elevator," he said, sounding bored. She turned and saw the steel doors of a private elevator. She jabbed the button. The doors opened instantly. She stepped inside, not looking back. "Alyssa," he said. Just before the doors closed, she froze. He hadn't known her name, but the drunks had been shouting it. "Don't let people see you're broken," he said, his voice flat. "It invites the wolves." The doors slid shut. Alyssa leaned against the cold metal wall as the elevator descended. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. She rode it down to a silent, pristine lobby and burst out onto the sidewalk of a clean, wealthy downtown street, miles from the rusty Anchor. She walked for 3 blocks, the morning air biting her cheeks. She was free. She was safe. She looked at the $50 bill in one hand and the business card in the other. Dominic Viscari. He wasn't a savior. He was just a different kind of wolf. She walked to the nearest storm drain, crumpled the heavy card in her fist, and shoved it through the grate. She watched it disappear into the darkness. She would never be that desperate. She pocketed the $50 and kept walking. Back in the penthouse. Dominic Viscari stood at the window, watching her tiny figure emerge from his building. He watched her walk, her shoulders hunched against the morning, until she turned the corner. He walked back to the coffee table and picked up the glass of water she hadn't touched. He ran a finger over the condensation ring it had left on the glass. He had broken his own rules. He had brought a stray into his home, a liability. He should have been annoyed. He should have been angry. But all he could think about, all he could see, was the defiant, terrified, hopeless look in her eyes just before she threw his card in the trash. It was an image that, for reasons he could not and did not want to understand, refused to leave him. That $50 had bought her less than 12 hours. Alyssa walked back to the rusty Anchor at 3 in the afternoon, her head high, pretending the conversation she was about to have was a negotiation. "Sal," she said, catching him by the beer taps. He didn't look up. He just kept wiping the counter. "Alyssa, I know I missed last night. It won't happen again. I can take the weekend shift." "It's not about the weekend, kid," he said, finally stopping. He looked tired. "You're a good worker. When you're sober. But you're not sober, you're a ghost. You're scaring my customers and you're scaring me. I'm not—" "You're done," he said. Not unkindly, but with a finality that hit her harder than a slap. "I can't. I'm sorry." She just stared at him. The floor, which she had mopped 1,000 times, suddenly seemed to drop out from under her. "Sal, please. No, go get help. Alyssa, then come see me." She walked out without another word. The firing was official. The last safety net was gone. She went back to the Starlight Motel. The neon sign buzzed. Even in the daylight, the manager, a heavy woman with a permanent scowl, was waiting by the office door. Checkout was 11 a.m. the woman barked. I know, I just got paid. I just need to... You got the money or not? $73.50 with the late fee. Alyssa checked her pocket. She had $8. I can get it by tonight. No, you get your stuff. You got 10 minutes, then I'm changing the lock and tossing your crap. Please, just give me 10 minutes. Alyssa ran to her room. She packed her meager belongings, 2 pairs of jeans, a few shirts, a toothbrush, her mother's tarnished locket, into her backpack. She was homeless. The word echoed in her head, hollow and metallic. She was 28 years old, and she was nothing. The next 3 days were a blur of cold, numbing panic. She spent the first night riding the 24-hour bus line until a driver kicked her off. She spent the next in a shelter, but left before sunrise. The smell of unwashed bodies and the fear of the other residents making her skin crawl. She was angry. A deep, vibrating rage at Mark for destroying her trust, at Sal for giving up on her, and at the world for being so hard. But underneath the anger was a chasm of desperation. She found herself at the public library, using a computer to scan job listings. She had no resume, no references. She was qualified for nothing. The ads blurred together. Waitress needed. Cleaner. Data entry. All required interviews she couldn't show up for. Clean and fed and smiling. Then she saw the other ads, the ones in the gigs section. Artistic model wanted. No experience necessary. $300 cash for 2 hours. She stared at the phone number. $300. That was a week at a motel. That was food. She made the call. The man's voice was slick, overly friendly. Yeah, beautiful. Come on down, we're just shooting some test stuff. Real artistic. The address was a walk-up over a pawn shop in a part of town that made the rusty Anchor look high class. The stairwell smelled of old garbage and urine. She almost turned back, but the thought of another night on the bus pushed her forward. She knocked. The man who opened the door was not an artist. He was 50, with greasy gray hair and a stained t-shirt, a heavy camera hung around his neck, bumping against his stomach. You're the girl, he said, looking her up and down, his eyes lingering. Come on in. Lock the door behind you. The apartment was a single room, a dirty mattress in one corner, a sheet tacked up for a backdrop in another. The ad said artistic, Alyssa said, her voice small, her hand still on the doorknob. It's real artistic. He smirked. I like to capture the natural form. Why don't you start with the jacket? We'll do some lingerie shots first, then we'll see how comfortable you get. Lingerie, she repeated. The ad didn't say anything about... It's implied sweetness. He took a step toward her. Don't be shy. I'm a professional. He reached out to help her with her jacket, his fingers grazing her collarbone. It was the same feeling as the alley, the same assumption, the same entitlement. No, she said. Come on, don't waste my time, he snapped, his friendly tone gone. He grabbed her arm. You're here, you're getting paid, you're doing the job. He tried to pull her toward the mattress. This time, she didn't freeze. The anger and the desperation finally found a single point. She yanked her arm back, grabbed the nearest object, a heavy glass ashtray from a side table, and smashed it not against him, but against the window next to the door. The glass exploded. The man yelped, jumping back, shielding his eyes. The sound of the breaking window echoed in the stairwell. Alyssa didn't wait. She ripped the door open, unlocked it, and flew down the stairs, her feet barely touching the steps. You crazy witch, he screamed from the landing above. You'll pay for that. She hit the street and ran. She ran for 6 blocks, not stopping until her lungs were burning and her sides ached. She ducked into an alley, collapsed behind a dumpster, and finally broke. She wept. Not for Mark, or her job, or her apartment. She wept because she had almost sold her body for $300 to a man who wouldn't have even paid her. She wept for the girl who had run out of every other option. She didn't know how long she sat there. Eventually, the rain started. A cold, miserable drizzle that soaked her thin jacket in minutes. She had $4 left, enough for a coffee, enough to sit in the warm for an hour. She found a small, 24-hour diner with a neon coffee sign. She slid into a booth in the back corner, her backpack wet at her feet. "Just a black coffee," she mumbled to the waitress, pushing her last few bills across the table. Her hands were shaking so hard she could barely lift the cup. The hot liquid scalded her tongue, but she welcomed the pain. It was real. She was staring into the cup, trying to figure out her next move, which shelter, which bus line, when a shadow fell over her table. "You look worse than last time." The voice. Low, gravelly, and cold, Alyssa's head snapped up. It was him, the man from the alley, Dominic Vascari. He was sitting in the booth directly across from hers. Though she hadn't seen him come in, he wasn't in a suit. He was wearing dark, expensive-looking jeans, a simple black Henley that strained against his shoulders, and a worn leather jacket. He looked younger, more raw, and infinitely more dangerous. He was alone, but his presence seemed to fill the entire diner. He just watched her, his dark eyes taking in her wet hair, her trembling hands, her defeated posture. This was the final humiliation. For her rock bottom to have a witness. "Leave me alone," she whispered. But the words broke. The dam she'd been holding back since she ran from the photographer's apartment, since she'd been fired, since Mark had changed the locks. It just disintegrated. A sob tore from her throat, loud and ugly in the quiet diner. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. She couldn't stop. It was the collapse she had been running from for months. He didn't say anything, and he didn't touch her. He just sat there, an immovable object, letting her shatter. The waitress looked over, concerned, but he gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head, and the waitress immediately found something to clean in the back. After a few minutes, the storm of her sobs quieted into ragged, hiccuping breaths. He pushed the napkin dispenser across the table toward her. "You threw away the card," he stated. It wasn't a question. She nodded, wiping her face with a handful of the cheap, thin napkins. "I didn't want your help." "And now?" he asked, his voice neutral. "I don't know what I want." She looked at him, her eyes red and swollen. "I have nowhere to go. I lost my job. I have no money. I'm done." He took a sip of his own coffee. "So you'd rather be a victim?" The words were sharp, and they stung. "I'm not a victim." "You were about to be in that alley," he said. "And judging by the glass on your jacket and the way you were running when you came in here, you just escaped something else. You're messy, Alyssa, and you're attracting wolves." "Like you?" she shot back, the anger returning. A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth, gone as quickly as it came. "I'm not a wolf. I'm what the wolves are afraid of." He leaned forward. "I'll ask you one more time. What do you want?" "I need a job," she said, her voice hoarse. "I'll do anything, cleaning, dishes. I don't care. I can't be out there anymore." He studied her for a long, silent moment. She felt like he was seeing every crack, every failure, every weakness. "I own a restaurant," he said finally. "Il Corvo. It's on Grand Street. It's high-end. My hostess quit 2 days ago." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick roll of cash. He peeled off 2 $100 bills and placed them on the table. "That's a down payment. You'll work 6 nights a week, 7 p.m. to close. You'll answer phones. You'll manage reservations, and you'll seat people. You'll be polite. You'll wear a black dress. You'll get $100 a night in cash at the end of your shift." She stared at the money. It was more than she'd made in 3 days at the Anchor. "You're just giving me a job? A hostess?" "An assistant," he corrected, echoing the outline's term. "You'll be assisting the floor manager. If you last 1 week, we'll make it permanent. If you're late, if you steal, or if you show up looking like you did tonight, I'll fire you myself." She looked from the money to his face. "Why? Why are you doing this?" "I told you," he said, standing up. "I don't like messes in my neighborhood. You're a mess. Clean yourself up." He threw another 20 on the table for their coffee and walked out. She sat there for a full minute, her heart pounding. He hadn't offered her kindness. He had offered her a transaction, a cold, hard business deal. And for the first time in months, she felt a flicker of something other than fear. The drive to the restaurant was silent. She hadn't expected him to be waiting outside, but his black SUV was at the curb, the same one from the alley. His driver, Marco, was at the wheel. Dominic sat in the back with her, the space between them feeling like a live wire. He stared out the window, as if she weren't even there. "There are rules," he said, his voice quiet, breaking the silence as they neared the wealthy part of downtown. She just waited. "My world is not your world. The men who eat at my restaurant, the men I do business with, they are not like your ex-boyfriend. They are not drunken construction workers. They are serious." He turned to look at her, his gaze heavy. "You will work. You will keep your head down. You will be invisible. You will see things you don't understand. You will hear names. You will say nothing. You will forget everything the moment you clock out. If you become a liability, if you talk, if you bring trouble to my door, I will cut you loose, and you will be in more danger than you ever were at that motel." He paused, letting the threat settle in the air. "Do you understand me?" Alyssa was numb. She had just run from a fake photographer. She had been sleeping on a bus. This man's vague threats of danger felt abstract. The $200 in her pocket felt real. "I'm tired of being scared," she said, her voice flat, surprising herself with its steadiness. "I've got nothing left to lose. I don't care about your world. I just want a paycheck." His expression didn't change, but his eyes seemed to approve. "Good." Il Corvo was nothing like the rusty anchor. It was beautiful, all dark, polished mahogany, low lighting, and tables covered in crisp white linens. The air smelled of garlic, wine, and old money. The manager, a sharp woman in her 40s named Sophia, looked Alyssa up and down with clear disapproval. "She's a mess, boss. She'll be clean by 7 p.m., Dominic said, already walking toward a private staircase. "Give her a uniform and the reservation book. If she slows you down, tell me." He was gone. Sophia sighed. "All right, kid, let's see if you can handle this." The first night was overwhelming. The computer system was complex. The regulars were demanding. A senator's aide snapped his fingers at her. An old woman complained that her table was too drafty. Alyssa's feet throbbed in the cheap black flats she'd had to buy with her advance. But she didn't break. She smiled. She apologized. She fixed the problems. She took the abuse. She realized what she had been doing her whole life. Only this time, she was getting paid for it at 2 a.m. Sophia handed her a crisp $100 bill. "You're stiff," Sophia said, "but you're not stupid. Be here at 6 tomorrow. We'll train you on the phones." Alyssa walked out into the cool night air. Clutching the money, she found a boarding house nearby and paid for a week in advance, a tiny, clean room with a lock on the door, for the first time in months. She slept. She bought a new black dress. She bought new shoes. She started eating regular meals in the restaurant's kitchen. The work was hard, but it was honest, and it was fair. When she did well, Sophia nodded. When she made a mistake, Sophia corrected her, curtly but clearly. There was no manipulation. There were no mind games. There were just the rules. She slowly began to regain a sense of self. The hollow, haunted look in her eyes was replaced by the sharp focus of someone with a purpose, even if that purpose was just seating the right people at the right tables. Dominic was always there, but never there. He would eat late, in a private room upstairs or at a secluded table in the back. He never spoke to her, but she would feel his eyes on her. She'd be arguing with the chef about a wait time or calming down an impatient customer, and she'd feel a prickle on the back of her neck. He was watching. He was judging. And she realized she didn't want to disappoint him. One evening, about 3 weeks in, was a disaster. A party of 12 showed up without a reservation, claiming they knew Dominic. A food critic was at table 4. The kitchen was backed up. Sophia was in a full-blown panic. Alyssa handled it. She charmed the critic with a free glass of wine, stalled the party of 12 by seating them at the bar, and reorganized the entire reservation map on the fly to accommodate the overflow. By midnight, the crisis was over. The critic left happy. The party of 12 spent a fortune. She was exhausted, but she was proud. She slipped into the back service stairwell, the only quiet place in the building, just to catch her breath for 5 minutes. The adrenaline faded, and the sheer, crushing weight of her life settled on her. She was doing it. She was surviving. But she was so alone. She had no one to tell about her small victory. A tear slipped down her cheek, then another. She wasn't sobbing. It was the quiet, hopeless crying of deep, bone-weary exhaustion. The heavy fire door opened from the top landing, and he was there. Dominic. She scrambled to her feet, wiping her face. "Mr. Vascari, I'm sorry, I was just—" "It's Dominic," he said, his voice quiet in the concrete echo chamber. He didn't come down. He just stood on the landing above, looking down at her. "Sophia said you handled the floor tonight. It was busy," she whispered. "You're not used to people treating you with respect." He observed. It wasn't a question. "It's harder than being treated badly, isn't it? The pressure." She looked up at him, shocked by the accuracy. "How did you know?" He walked down the steps, stopping one step above her, so they were almost eye to eye. He was too close. She could smell the faint, clean scent of his cologne and the starch of his white shirt. "Because," he said, his voice softer, "broken people are easy. It's the ones who start to heal that are complicated." He looked at her, and his gaze was so intense it felt like a physical touch. He saw her, not the mess, not the hostess, her. A strand of her hair had fallen loose and was stuck to the wet tear track on her cheek. He lifted his hand. He moved so slowly, giving her every chance to flinch, to pull away. She stayed perfectly still, her heart hammering against her ribs. His fingers, warm and calloused, brushed the hair from her face. His thumb swiped gently across her cheekbone, wiping away the tear. A shiver went through her, deep and electric. It wasn't fear. It was something else. Something she hadn't felt in a very, very long time. Her breath hitched. His eyes dropped to her mouth. The air between them was thick, charged, undeniable. He held the look for one more second, then pulled his hand back as if he'd been burned. He clenched it into a fist at his side. "Go home, Alyssa," he said, his voice suddenly rough. "All business again. Sophia can close up." He turned and walked past her, down the stairs and out the service door, leaving her alone in the stairwell, trembling, her cheeks still burning from his touch. She went back to her small room. She locked the door. She stood in the dark, touching her face where his hand had been. She was confused. She'd felt a warmth, a connection, that went beyond gratitude, and it terrified her. He was her boss. He was a gangster. He was everything she should have been running from. She was scared of him. But for the first time in her life, she was even more scared of wanting more. The moment in the stairwell had changed things. Not obviously, not immediately, but in the small, tectonic shifts that realign a world. Dominic was still her boss. He was still distant, still intimidating, still the man who held meetings in a locked room on the 3rd floor that the restaurant staff was forbidden to approach. But he was also the man who had seen her cry, who had touched her face with a gentleness that seemed utterly at odds with the violence she knew he possessed. The week after, he began to pull her from the restaurant. It started small. An order, delivered via text. "Be downstairs in 10 minutes. We're driving." The first time, she'd run down, breathless, her hostess apron still on. Marco, his driver, had just looked at her. "He means dressed, Alyssa." The next time, she was ready. Jeans, a clean sweater, her hair pulled back. She slid into the back of the black SUV. Dominic was there, laptop open, not looking at her. "My tailor is holding 3 suits," he said as Marco pulled into traffic. "He's an old man. He trusts my judgment more than his own. Go in. Tell him the charcoal gray is too stiff in the shoulders and that the pinstripe is fine. Ignore the navy. He'll try to sell you on the navy." Alyssa had stared at him. "You want me to critique your suits? I want you to be my eyes. I can't stand the man's chatter today." So she had. She'd walked into the most expensive tailor shop she had ever seen, a place that smelled of cedar and wool, and had, with trembling hands, felt the fabric of a $10,000 suit and repeated his words. The old tailor had looked at her, then at the suit, and nodded. "The boss is right. The shoulder is stiff. I will fix it." She'd returned to the car with a small, buzzing sense of power. The next trip was different. He took her to a warehouse district by the river, the buildings all corrugated steel and broken windows. He didn't get out of the car. He handed her a simple, thick manila envelope. "Third floor," he said, his voice flat. "The door says Petro Imports. Give this to the man at the desk. Do not say anything other than, 'This is from Mr. Vescari.' Then come back to the car." "What's in it?" she asked, her hand closing around the envelope. It was just paper, but it felt heavy. His eyes, cold and dark, met hers. "You work in my restaurant. You see men come in, they eat, they leave. That is one part of my business. This is another. Do you want to do this? Or do you want to go back to seating senators?" It was a test. He was showing her a piece of his world, the one he'd warned her about. She gripped the envelope. "Third floor, Petro Imports." She got out. The air smelled like salt and diesel. She walked into the dark building, her footsteps echoing on the concrete stairs. There was no elevator. The third-floor landing was lit by a single, flickering fluorescent tube, the door. Frosted glass, said Petro Imports. She pushed it open. A massive man, built like a refrigerator, sat at a steel desk. He looked up, his face impassive. "This is from Mr. Vescari," Alyssa said, her voice clear, not trembling, though her heart was trying to escape her chest. The man didn't speak. He just took the envelope, opened a drawer, and dropped it inside. He looked back at his computer screen. She was dismissed. She walked back down the stairs, her knees weak, and got into the SUV. Dominic was on the phone. "No," he said into it. "Absolutely not. Burn the shipment." He hung up and looked at her. "You're a good assistant, Alyssa," he said. And that was all. But she had crossed a line. She had seen a glimpse of the not legitimate part of his world, and she hadn't run. A part of her was terrified. But another part, the part that had been beaten down and called useless for years, felt a strange, defiant pride. He had trusted her. With that trust came a new confidence. She stopped looking at the floor when he entered a room. She met his gaze, and she started to ask questions. They were driving back from the warehouse. She'd been silent for 10 minutes. "Why me?" she asked, the words quiet. He was looking out the window, the city lights sliding over his face. "What do you mean?" "The alley, the job, this..." She held up her hands. "I was a drunk. A mess. You said so yourself. You could have hired anyone. Why did you help me?" Dominic's jaw tightened. He didn't answer for a long time. The question hung in the air of the car, thick with unspoken things. He didn't answer her. He looked away, but he wasn't seeing the city. He was seeing a small, pastel-pink bedroom from 15 years ago. He was 19. His sister, Mia, was 18. She had been the light of the family, the one who laughed, the one with the bright, artistic soul. And then she'd met a boy, and the boy had introduced her to a needle. Dominic. Already shouldering the family business his father was fumbling, had been too busy with shipments and territory and violence. He'd seen her getting thin. He'd seen the hollowness in her eyes, the same hollow he'd seen in Alyssa's at the bar. He told himself he'd deal with it later, but later never came. He'd found her. She was on her bed, in her pink room, a single note on the nightstand. "I'm sorry, Dom. I'm just so tired." No one had helped her. The friends she'd had, the boys she'd loved, they'd all treated her like an object, then like trash. His own father had been more concerned with the shame, the dishonor, than the loss. Dominic had never forgiven himself. He had all the power in the city, but he couldn't save his own sister. He had been too late. He looked at Alyssa, at her dark hair, her resilient spirit, the deep, hidden pain in her eyes. She wasn't Mia, but she was the same kind of lost. "I don't like seeing people get thrown away," he said finally, his voice rough. "You're a fighter, Alyssa, even when you don't know it. I respect that." It wasn't the whole truth, but it was the only part he could give. She just watched him, sensing the deep, cold grief under the words. She didn't push, she just nodded, and a new, fragile layer of understanding settled between them. A week later, he announced the opening of Il Gabbiano, the Seagull. It was his new flagship, a stunning glass-walled restaurant on the pier. It was his biggest push yet into legitimate enterprise. "I'm hosting the opening night," he told her, not in the car, but in his office at Il Corvo. A charity gala, politicians, judges, investors, and others. "What hostess station do you want me on?" she asked, pulling out a notepad. "You're not working," he said. He stood and walked to the window. "I want you to be there, as my guest." Alyssa's breath caught. As your guest? Dominic, I don't have anything to— 8 p.m., Friday, he said, cutting her off. "Marco will pick you up. Don't be late." She had nothing to wear. She had 2 black hostess dresses and 3 pairs of jeans. She spent the next 2 days in a low-grade panic, walking past shop windows, knowing she couldn't afford even the mannequins. On Thursday night, a box was delivered to her small boarding house room. There was no knock. It was just left at her door. It was a heavy, slate-gray box, tied with a simple black ribbon. There was no card. Inside, nestled in layers of tissue paper, was a dress. It was black, as the outline dictated, but a black so deep it seemed to drink the light. It was sleeveless, with a high, modest neckline, but it was cut from a fabric so fine, a heavy silk or crepe, that it was clearly devastatingly expensive. It was simple. It was elegant. It was powerful. She knew, without any doubt, who had sent it. On Friday night, she put it on. She'd spent her last $40 getting her hair styled in a simple, low bun, and another $10 on a dark, subtle lipstick. When she looked in the mirror, she didn't see the drunk from the rusty anchor. She didn't see the broken victim from Mark's apartment. She saw a woman when Marco picked her up. He didn't say a word, but he held the car door open a little longer than usual, his eyes wide with surprise. Il Gabbiano was a masterpiece of glass and light, perched over the dark water. The room was buzzing with the sound of 100 conversations, the clinking of champagne glasses, and a live string quartet. It was full of the most powerful people in the city. Alyssa stepped in, her hands clasped in front of her, feeling like an imposter, and then she saw him. He wasn't in his usual dark suit. He was in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. He looked like something from another era. He was holding court near the bar, a state senator laughing at something he'd said, a judge patting his shoulder. He looked up, as if he'd felt her enter. His conversation stopped. The smile on his face faded, replaced by an expression of raw, focused intensity. The senator, the judge, the crowd, they all disappeared. He just stared at her, taking in the dress, her face, her presence. He excused himself, his words curt, and walked toward her. He didn't hurry, but he didn't stop, parting the crowd like the sea. He stopped a foot in front of her. "Alyssa," he said, and his voice was a low vibration she felt in her chest. "Dominic," she replied, her voice steady. "The restaurant is beautiful." "So are you," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "The dress, it's correct. Thank you for sending it," she whispered. The string quartet shifted, and a slow, mournful ballad began. He held out his hand. "Dance with me." It wasn't a request. She placed her hand in his. His skin was warm. He led her to the small, impromptu dance floor. He put one hand firmly on the small of her back, at her waist, and took her other hand in his. She rested her free hand on his shoulder, the fabric of his tuxedo impossibly fine. They began to move. He was a good dancer, assured and strong, leading her effortlessly. The rest of the room was watching. She could feel the weight of 100 pairs of eyes, the whispers. Who was she? "Let them watch," Dominic murmured, his mouth close to her ear. "Tonight, you're with me." A shiver ran down her spine. The flirtation that had been a spark in the stairwell was now a visible, crackling current. They moved slowly, in sync. The space between them charged. After the song ended, and then another, the air in the room felt too thick, too hot. "It's a little overwhelming," she said, fanning herself slightly. "I need some air," he said, his eyes intense. Come with me." He didn't let go of her hand. He led her away from the party, through a side door marked private, and up a narrow, dark staircase. He pushed open a heavy metal door, and they were outset. They were on a private rooftop balcony, high above the restaurant, overlooking the harbor. The city glittered across the water, a tapestry of light. The only sound was the distant hum of traffic and the faint, cold cry of a gull. They stood in silence for a moment, just breathing the cool, salty air. "You've done an amazing job here, Dominic," she said. He was looking at her, not the view. "This is the legitimate part, the part I'm building for the future." "And the other part?" she asked, thinking of the man in the warehouse. "That's the part that paid for this one," he said. He stepped closer. She was backed against the railing, but not trapped. "You're not scared of me, are you? Not anymore." "No," she said, and was surprised to find it was true. "I'm not." He lifted his hand, his gaze dropping to her mouth. He traced the line of her jaw with the back of his fingers, his touch sending that same electric shiver through her. "Alyssa," he whispered, his voice thick. He leaned in. He moved so slowly, giving her time to protest, to turn away. His other hand came to rest on her waist, gently, not grabbing but cradling her. It was a question. She shivered, but she did not pull away. She leaned in, just a fraction of an inch, and then his lips met hers. It was a slow, charged kiss. It wasn't the desperate, slobbering assault of the drunks or the manipulative pecks of Mark. It was warm and firm and questioning. His lips were soft, and they tasted faintly of whiskey and resolve. He held her waist, pulling her slightly closer, and she put her hand on his chest, feeling his heart thumping a heavy, steady beat. The kiss deepened, just for a moment, a recognition of the tension that had been building for weeks. It was passionate, but more than that, it was real. And that's what scared her. She gasped, pulling back. Her hands were flat against his tuxedo. "Dominic, wait." He stepped back instantly, his hands dropping, though his breathing was heavy and his eyes were dark. "What's wrong? I can't," she whispered, turning away to look at the water, her hands gripping the cold railing. "I hurt you," he said, his voice flat. "No," she said, turning back, her eyes shining. "No, you didn't. That's the problem. It's just—" She struggled for the words. "I'm not her. I'm not the woman in that dress. I'm still the girl on the motel floor. I'm still broken. How do I know? How do I know I'm kissing you, Dominic, and not just the first man in my life who's ever been kind? How do I know I'm not just clinging?" He looked at her, his expression unreadable, but clearly affected. He saw her fear, her self-doubt, and he understood it was the one thing his power couldn't fix. He reached out but stopped himself. "I'm not them. Alyssa," he said, his voice rough. "I'm not Mark. I'm not those animals in the alley. I will never force you. I will never take anything from you that you don't want to give." He stepped back, putting distance between them. "When you're with me, it will be your choice. Completely. I can wait." She nodded, a tear tracing a path down her cheek, which she angrily wiped away. He offered her his arm, not as a lover but as a gentleman. "Let's get you home." Later that night, Dominic stood in the penthouse, his tuxedo jacket off, his tie undone, staring at the same city view from his own window. An older, balding man in an immaculate suit stood by the unlit fireplace. His consigliere, Vinny. "The opening was a success, Dominic," Vinny said. The senator was pleased. The judge was accommodating. Dominic just nodded, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "The girl," Vinny said, his voice quiet. Dominic's head turned, his eyes going cold. "She's a problem, boss. People are talking. They see you. They see the way you look at her. The Rinaldi brothers were watching you both during the dance. She's not your concern," Dominic said. "Everything you touch is my concern," Vinny countered, his voice gentle but firm. "A man with nothing to lose. He is a fortress, a man who cares about something. He has a weak spot, a distraction. Someone will see that and someone will use it. Dominic turned to the window, his reflection staring back at him. "Leave. Vinny." Vinny nodded, walking silently to the door. "Be careful. Dominic, an enemy will always aim for what you love. You just showed them all exactly where to aim." The elevator doors chimed, and Dominic was left alone in the dark, the warning hanging in the air like an executioner's hood. Vinny's warning had settled over Dominic like a shroud, but for Alyssa, the weeks after the gala were the calmest she had known. The rooftop kiss, and her subsequent retreat, had created a strange, respectful tension. Dominic kept his distance. Physically, he no longer asked her on errands. He was back to being the boss, and she was back to being the hostess. But the silence was louder than their conversation had been. She would catch him watching her across the restaurant floor, his gaze so heavy she could feel it as a physical weight, and he would look away, his jaw tight. The calm was an illusion. The city was holding its breath. Alyssa had started to feel a new kind of confidence. Walking the 4 blocks from her boarding house to Il Corvo, she had savings, she had dignity, she was no longer a victim. The first time she saw the car, she didn't think anything of it. A dark, older model sedan, a heavy American car, parked across from her boarding house in the early afternoon. The next day, it was there again, 2 blocks down. The third time she saw it, it was idling across the street from the restaurant's service entrance as she left her shift. Well after 1 a.m, a prickle of paranoia, sharp and familiar, ran up her spine. She told herself she was being stupid. It was a city. There were cars. But the man in the driver's seat, his face shadowed, never moved. He was just watching. She began to take different routes. She started taking the bus, even though it was slower, but she felt it, a wrongness, a shift in the air. She was being watched. The bubble of her new, safe life burst on a Tuesday. The restaurant was packed. A theater crowd had just descended, and the reservation line was ringing off the hook. Alyssa was at the hostess stand, a polite, fixed smile on her face as she juggled the seating chart. "Alyssa," Sophia said, gliding by, "you have a delivery." "I didn't order anything," she said, confused. "It's on your station." Tucked behind the reservation book was a single, thick, black envelope. It felt heavy, made of expensive, textured cardstock. Her name was typed on the front, just Alyssa. Her blood ran cold. This wasn't a flower delivery. This wasn't a note from a customer. This was a message. She grabbed it, her hand trembling, and mumbled to Sophia, "I need 1 minute." She fled to the service stairwell, the place where he had touched her face. Her hands fumbled as she ripped the heavy paper. There was no note. There was only a photograph. It was torn in half, a jagged, violent rip. It was the photo from the rooftop at Il Gabbiano. It was her, and it was Dominic. It was the moment just before they kissed, his hand on her waist, her hand on his chest. It was intimate, undeniable. And now, it was a threat. She felt the air leave her lungs. They had been on a private, hidden balcony, but someone had been there. Someone had been watching them with a long-lens camera. "We know who you are. We know where you are. We know what you are to him." The message was clear. Vinny's warning, which she had not heard, had come true. She wasn't scared, not this time. This time she was furious. This was Mark, all over again. A man's world, a man's problems, and she was the collateral damage. She was the leverage. She had traded one cage for another, and this one was infinitely more dangerous. She didn't go back to the hostess stand. She shoved the stairwell door open, her heels clicking in anger on the marble floor. She walked past a stunned Sophia, past the main dining room, and straight to the private staircase that led to his office. 2 of his men she recognized but didn't know, were standing at the top of the stairs. "He's in a meeting," one of them said, putting a hand out. "I don't care," Alyssa spat, ducking under his arm. She slammed the heavy oak door open. Dominic was at his desk, Vinny at his side, 3 other men in suits standing around a table of maps. Every head snapped toward her. "Get out," Dominic said, his voice a low growl, assuming it was one of his men. "No," Alyssa said, her voice shaking with rage. She marched to his desk, her face pale. I won't. She threw the torn photograph on his polished desk. It landed between a crystal ashtray and a stack of ledgers. Dominic's eyes dropped to the photo. He went perfectly, dangerously still. The air in the room crackled and died. Vinny closed his eyes, as if in prayer. "What is this?" Alyssa demanded, her voice rising. "This is my life. This is the safety you offered me. I'm not a toy. I'm not a pawn in your war with whoever these animals are." Dominic looked up at her, his face a mask of cold fury. He stood up slowly. "Vinny, get them out." Vinny ushered the other men out, his face grim, and closed the door, leaving them alone. "I'm done," Alyssa said, backing toward the door. "I quit. I'm not your hostess. I'm not your guest. I'm leaving this city. You will never see me again." She turned to leave. In a second, he was across the room, his hand on the door, slamming it shut. "No," he said. She flinched, pressing back against the wood. "You don't get it," he said, his voice low, his anger not directed at her, but at the world, at the Rinaldis, at himself. "You think you can quit? You think you can just walk away? Watch me," she hissed. "They aren't threatening you because you work for me," he said, bracing his hands on the door, caging her. "They're threatening you because you were with me, because they saw that." He jabbed a finger toward the desk. "They see you as mine, and in their world, that means you're leverage." "I am not yours," she snarled. "I know," he roared, and the sound of his own loss of control seemed to shock him. He pulled back, running a hand over his face. He took a breath. "I know," he said, his voice quieter, more dangerous. "But they don't. Running is the worst thing you can do. Alyssa, if you walk out that door, you won't make it to the bus station. They'll pick you up, they'll take you, and they will use you to get to me." He looked at her, his eyes full of a bleak honesty she had never seen. "These are the Rinaldi brothers. It's an old feud. My father, he did things, and they're trying to reclaim their territory. They are not like your ex. They are not like those drunks. They are butchers. And God help me, I showed them what I value." The anger in her chest deflated, replaced by a sudden, cold dread. He wasn't trying to control her. He was terrified. What do they want?" she whispered. "They want me weak. They want me distracted. And they think you are both." He touched the torn photo with his finger. "I put this target on your back. I'm the only one who can take it off. But you have to trust me. You have to do exactly what I say." She stared at him, her mind racing. Run, and be taken, stay, and be his prisoner. What choice is that? "It's the only one that keeps you breathing," he said. He picked up his phone. "Marco, bring the car to the service entrance. Now." "And I want Leo and Sal in the lobby. She's moving." "Moving where?" Alyssa said, standing up straight. "You can't just—" "I can," he said, his voice flat. "All business. You're not going back to the boarding house, not even for your clothes. You'll go to a building I own. It's secure. My men will be with you." "With me? Or guarding me?" she asked, her voice bitter. "You're putting me under house arrest. I'm putting you in a safe apartment against your will, because your will is to get yourself killed," he snapped. "I won't let that happen. This isn't a discussion." He opened the door. His 2 men were there. "Leo, Sal, you're with her. She goes nowhere without one of you. No one gets near her. No one, not the mailman, not the pizza guy. No one. We clear." "Yes, boss," they said in unison. He took her arm. She didn't pull away. She was numb. He led her down the service stairs, the same stairs where she'd cried, and out into the alley. The black SUV was there, engine humming. He opened the door for her. She was a prisoner, a beautiful, well-cared-for prisoner. The apartment was stunning. It was a corner unit on the 22nd floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows and furniture that looked like it had never been sat on. It was also a fortress. The elevator required a key. The front door had 3 locks, and Sal, a heavy-set man with a kind face and dead eyes, was sitting on a chair in the hallway outside. Leo was in the lobby downstairs. "I'll have clothes sent over," Dominic said, standing in the middle of the vast, silent living room. "When can I leave?" she asked. "When it's over," he said, and walked out. The first few days were a special kind of hell. She was trapped. She paced the beautiful rooms like a caged animal. She had television, she had books, she had a fully stocked kitchen, but she had no freedom. But Dominic, true to his word, didn't abandon her. He came every night. He would arrive around midnight after the restaurants had closed, letting himself in with his own key. He never brought his world with him. He was just Dominic. He would have a briefcase, and from it, he would pull containers of food from Il Corvo. "You can't live on room service," he said the first night, setting up plates of risotto and veal at the small kitchen island. So they ate, and in the forced, sterile quiet of the safe house, they talked. She told him about her mother, who had loved gardening. He told her about growing up in this city, learning to box before he could read. She told him about her dream, long dead, of opening a small cafe. He told her about the headaches of shipping logistics, carefully omitting what exactly. He was shipping. The ice between them didn't just melt, it evaporated. He would take off his suit jacket, roll up his sleeves, and she would see the man, not the boss. She saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight he carried. He laughed. She'd never heard it before. She'd made a dry, sarcastic comment about the television shows she was forced to watch, and he let out a short, rusty bark of a laugh. It transformed his face, making him look younger. She found herself waiting for midnight, her heart doing a stupid, betraying leap when she heard his key in the lock. One night, she was asleep on the couch, and he covered her with a blanket, his touch lingering on her shoulder. She woke up alone, the scent of his cologne on the cashmere, and she knew she was in trouble. Not from the Rinaldis. The attack came at 2 a.m, on a night he wasn't there. He'd been kept late. She was alone, trying to read a book, the silence of the apartment amplifying every creak. Then she heard it. It wasn't a creak. It was a scrape. A metallic click from the service door in the kitchen, the one she never used. Her blood turned to ice. She held her breath. Scrape. Click. Someone was working the lock. Sal was downstairs. Leo was in the lobby. This door. They hadn't anticipated an attack from here. She scrambled off the couch, her hands shaking so hard she could barely hold her phone. She didn't call Sal in the hall. She called the one number she had memorized. It rang once. "What's wrong?" His voice was instant, alert. Someone's at the service door," she whispered, backing into the bedroom, dragging a chair in front of the door. "Dominic, they're in the kitchen." "Leo's coming up. Lock the bedroom door. Get in the closet. I'm 5 minutes away." She heard a thud from the living room. The kitchen door was open. She locked the bedroom door, her breath sobbing in her throat. She heard shouting in the hallway. Sal. She dove into the walk-in closet, huddled behind a row of cashmere coats he had bought for her, and made herself small. The sounds were terrifying. A crash. A man shouting in Italian. Another crash, like a body hitting a wall. Then a single, sharp sound that was not a firecracker. Then silence. She was crying, her hands over her mouth, rocking back and forth, back in the alley, back in the photographer's apartment. The bedroom door burst open. She screamed, "Alyssa! It's me, Dominic!" His voice was a roar. He ripped the closet door open. He was there, his hair wild, his shirt undone, and a gun in his hand. She didn't see the gun. She saw him. She flew out of the closet and into his arms, clinging to him like a lifeline. "You're safe," he was whispering, his voice a gravelly reassurance, his arms crushing her, one hand tangled in her hair. "You're safe. I'm here." He held her for a long time, his body trembling with a rage she had never seen. "I'm here." He wouldn't let her leave the bedroom. He made her sit on the bed while he and his men, Sal, Leo, and 2 others who had appeared, cleaned up. One man, a Rinaldi soldier, was dragged out in a body bag. He had come up the service elevator, bypassing the guards. Dominic came back into the bedroom as the sun was starting to streak the sky. He looked exhausted, and his fury had cooled into a dark, simmering resolve. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, wrapped in a blanket, shaking. I can't be alone," she whispered. her voice cracking. "Dominic, please, don't leave me." He looked at her, his face grim. He toed off his shoes and sat on the bed. "Move over," he said, his voice gentle. She slid under the covers. He didn't undress. He lay down on top of the comforter, a solid, warm wall between her and the door. He put one arm over her, pulling her back against his chest. His body was protective, restrained. It was not the touch of a lover, it was the touch of a guard, a guardian. "No one is getting in," he said, his voice a low rumble against her hair. "Sleep. I'll be here." She buried her face in his shirt, smelling the scent of him, and for the first time in her life, surrounded by violence, she felt completely, utterly safe. She fell asleep. She woke to the feeling of being watched. Morning light was pouring into the room. She was still tangled in the sheets, her back still pressed against him. He was awake. He hadn't slept. He was lying on his side, propped on an elbow, looking at her. His hair was messy, his jaw dark with stubble. He looked rumpled and human, and impossibly beautiful. The restraint in his gaze was gone, replaced by a raw, naked hunger that made her breath catch. "You stayed," she whispered. "I told you I would," he said, his voice rough from lack of sleep. This was the moment. Her fear of clinging was gone. This wasn't clinging. This was choosing. He wasn't Mark. He wasn't a wolf. He was the man who had stayed awake all night, armed to guard her sleep. She was learning to want again, on her own terms. She lifted a trembling hand and touched his face, the rough stubble on his jaw. He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. "Alyssa," he whispered. And it was a warning, a plea. "Are you sure?" She didn't answer with words. She leaned in, rose up on her elbow, and kissed him. It was not the slow, questioning kiss of the rooftop. This was a kiss of gratitude, of desperation, of claiming. It was her choice. She initiated it. His control, held so tightly for so long, snapped. He groaned, rolling her onto her back, his mouth devouring hers. It was no longer restrained. It was deep and hungry and full of everything he had been holding back. But it wasn't violent. It was reverence. "I need," she gasped, as his lips moved from her mouth to her jaw, to the hollow of her throat. "I know," he breathed. Their first night together was not a night at all, but a sun-drenched morning, a reclaiming of intimacy. It was tender. His hands, which she knew could break a man's wrist, were impossibly gentle. His fingers explored her face, her shoulders, her waist, as if he were memorizing her, as if she were made of glass. It was intense. Their eyes never unlocked, their breathing synced, becoming one ragged sound in the quiet room. This wasn't the selfish fumbling of her past. This was a collision. It was two broken, guarded people finally lowering their shields. It was emotional, a silent conversation of trust and need. He moved over her, his body a perfect, warm weight, and she arched to meet him, not in surrender, but in demand. This was not lust. It was a reclaiming of herself, of her body, of her right to want and be wanted. Afterward, they lay tangled in the sheets, the sounds of the city far below. She was curled against his side, her head on his chest, listening to the steady, strong beat of his heart. He held her, his hand stroking her hair, his touch no longer protective, but possessive. He kissed the top of her head. He pulled her closer, his arms a cage she never wanted to leave. "No one," he whispered, his voice a raw, unbreakable vow in the quiet room. "No one will ever hurt you again. Not while I breathe." That morning, the sunlit room felt like a violation. The intimacy they had shared, so tender and new, was immediately contaminated by the reality of the previous night, the attempted break-in, the man who had been dragged from the living room, and the promise Dominic had whispered into her hair. "No one will ever hurt you again," all hung in the air. The promise was not a comfort. It was a chain. Dominic was not the man who had held her. He was back to being the boss, dressed in a fresh suit, his face a mask of cold strategy. He was on the phone before his coffee was even brewed. He used a master key for the service elevator, Dominic said, his voice low and dangerous. Vinny sitting across from him at the glass dining table. A Rinaldi soldier doesn't have my codes. He doesn't have a master key. He was given it, Vinny said, his face grim. Boss, the leak isn't from the outside. It's not a Rinaldi problem. It's our problem. Dominic's eyes met Alyssa's across the room. She was standing by the bedroom door, wrapped in a silk robe he had provided, a bruise forming on her cheek from where she'd hit the closet wall. He saw her, and his expression softened for a fraction of a second, then hardened again. Someone inside my organization gave them her location, Dominic said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Someone told them where I was keeping her. Someone is feeding them my routines. Tensions in the apartment, their supposed fortress, ratcheted to an unbearable level. The air, once filled with trust, was now thick with suspicion. Dominic's men, Sal and Leo, were visibly on edge. They had failed, and they knew it. I'm moving you, Dominic announced, hanging up the phone, to a property upstate. It's concrete. There are no windows, and no one but me knows the address. You'll be safe there until I've cleaned my house. Alyssa looked at him. The man who had gently held her as she slept was now talking about locking her in a windowless box. No, she said. Dominic, who had been buttoning his jacket, froze. This is not a discussion, Alyssa. This is about your life. And I'm saying no, she said, her voice shaking but gaining strength. She walked into the room, pulling the robe tighter. I'm not a package. Dominic, I'm not a piece of furniture you can hide in a storage unit. I ran from Mark. I ran from the motel. I ran from that photographer. I am done running. She stood in front of him, meeting his shocked, angry gaze. That man last night, he knew my routine, she said, her voice hard. That means I'm the one they're watching. I'm the bait. You lock me in a box, and you'll never find the mole. They'll just wait. But if I'm here, you'll be a target, he snarled, terrified. I'm already a target, she yelled. Don't you get it? You did that. You put that target on my back. But I'm not going to be a victim. I'm not going to run. I'm going to stay right here, and I'm going to help you find the person who's trying to kill me. She was stronger. The hollowed-out girl from the rusty anchor was gone, replaced by this woman who stood bruised and defiant in a silk robe, ready for a war she had never asked for. Dominic stared at her for a long, silent moment. His fury was warring with a deep, profound respect. He saw the strength he had always known she had. Fine, he said, his voice clipped. You stay, but you don't move. Sal and Leo, you are not in the hallway. You are in this living room. You sit on this couch. She does not go to the bathroom without one of you standing at the door. We clear? The men nodded, their faces grim. Dominic turned back to Alyssa. And you. You are the most stubborn woman I have ever met. You're just figuring that out, she asked, a spark of her old, dry wit returning. He almost smiled. I'm going to my office. I am going to tear my organization apart, piece by piece, until I find the rat. The search was brutal. Dominic, driven by a cold, protective fury, was relentless. He interrogated his captains. He reviewed financial records. Vinny, his loyal consigliere, worked without sleep, sifting through security logs and phone records. The Rinaldis are just the buyers, Vinny explained. 2 days later, he and Dominic in the penthouse office. They're paying for the information. The seller is one of ours. Who? Dominic demanded. The key card logs from the service elevator, Vinny said, sliding a printout across the desk. It was accessed 3 times last week, not by maintenance, but by a management-level key. Specifically, a key belonging to the dock-loading administrator. Dominic's blood ran cold. There's only one man with that key. Paolo, Vinny said, his voice heavy. My cousin, Dominic whispered, the word tasting like acid. Paolo Vescari, his father's brother's son, a man who, by rights, felt he should have had a larger piece of the empire. Dominic had been given control of the city, while Paolo had been left to manage the docks, a grubby, if profitable, part of the business. Paolo was bitter, old school, and greedy. He had always sneered at Dominic's legitimate restaurants, seeing them as a sign of weakness. He's feeding the Rinaldis information. Dominic realized, the pieces clicking into place. My locations, my shipments, and her. He's giving them Alyssa. He thinks she's my weakness, the thing he can use to make me soft and destabilize my power. What are your orders, boss? Get the team, Dominic said, his voice a low, terrifying calm. We're going to the docks. We're picking up my cousin. I'll handle him myself. He grabbed his phone and dialed Alyssa. She picked up on the first ring. Dominic, what is it? I found him, he said. The mole. It's my cousin. Oh, God, she breathed. I'm handling it. Now, you listen to me. Do not open that door. Do not let anyone in, not even if they say it's me, not until you see my face. I'm on my way to you as soon as this is done. I love you. The last 3 words hung in the air. He hadn't said them before. She hadn't either. I love you too, she whispered. Be careful. He hung up and turned to Vinny. Let's go. But before Dominic could even get to the elevator, his phone rang again. It was Sal, his man in the apartment. Boss, Sal said, his voice strained. We got a problem. What? There's an evacuation order. Fire department's on the line. They say there's a fire 3 floors down. We have to... It's a lie, Dominic said, his voice hollow with dread. It's him. He's not waiting. He's moving. Barricade the door. Do not let them in. Boss, they're already here, Sal yelled. Dominic could hear the sounds of shouting, of heavy, metallic impacts. Alyssa, he roared into the phone. The line went dead. Dominic was in the SUV, racing through the city at 90 miles an hour, his men following in a second car. He ran every red light. He was on the phone, screaming at his security team at the building. But the lines were dead. When he arrived, the lobby was silent. He stormed into the elevator, his gun in his hand, and rode it up, his heart a block of ice in his chest. The apartment door was off its hinges, splintered and broken. He stepped into the living room. It was chaos. Furniture was overturned. A lamp was shattered. Sal was on the floor, groaning, a dark pool of blood spreading from a wound in his leg. Leo was unconscious near the kitchen, his head having hit the marble counter. And Alyssa was gone. Dominic's mind, usually so sharp and strategic, just stopped. He walked, as if in a daze, through the wrecked apartment, his gun hanging loosely at his side. He saw her phone, smashed on the floor. He walked into the living room, past the sofa where they had talked for hours, and looked at the wall. Paolo had left him a message. Carved into the expensive, hand-troweled plaster with a large, serrated knife were 3 words. You were warned. Dominic Vascari, the man who controlled the city, the man who never lost his composure, touched the jagged, carved letters with a trembling finger. His men, Vinny included, poured into the apartment behind him. They saw Sal, and they saw Leo. They called for a medical team. Then they saw their boss. He turned around, and his face was something none of them had ever seen. The cold, controlled mask was gone. In its place was a raw, vulnerable, animalistic rage. His eyes were red, his breathing ragged. Boss, Vinny said, taking a cautious step forward. He's dead, Dominic whispered, his voice cracking. We'll find him. No. Dominic looked at Vinny, and his men saw, for the first time, the true vulnerability of their leader. They saw the man, not the boss. He took her. He put his hands on her. He's not just dead. I'm going to take him apart. He grabbed Vinny by the lapels, his billion-dollar composure shattered. Where is he? Where would that rat hide? Tell me, or so help me God, I'll... The docks, Vinny said, grabbing Dominic's shoulders. His father's old fish-packing plant. It's abandoned, but it's his territory. It's the only place he'd be stupid enough to feel safe. Dominic, get a grip. You're unraveling. You go in like this. You're dead, and so is she. The words sliced through the red haze. Dominic blinked. He let go of Vinny. He took a deep, shuddering breath. He looked at the message on the wall one more time. Get the team, he said, his voice now pure, cold ice. All of them. We're going to the docks, and we're burning it to the ground. Alyssa woke up with a pounding headache and the smell of old fish and diesel in her nose. Her hands were tied behind her back. She was on a cold, damp concrete floor. She's awake, a voice said. She blinked. her vision clearing. She was in a large empty warehouse, lit by a few bare bulbs. 2 men stood near the door, smoking, and a third man was sitting on a wooden crate, watching her. He was older than Dominic, softer, with a bitter twist to his mouth. Paolo. Hello. Alyssa. Paolo sneered. My cousin has expensive taste and stupid weaknesses. Alyssa's mind was racing. She wasn't the girl from the alley. She was a woman who was loved by a dangerous man. And that man had taught her how to survive. She just had to stall. I don't know what you want, she whispered, her voice trembling. I'm sick. Oh, you'll be sicker before the night is over, Paolo said, laughing. No, please, she said, and she made herself gag, a dry, heaving sound. I'm pregnant. Paolo stopped laughing. His face darkened. What? I'm pregnant, she sobbed, the lie coming easily. It's Dominic's. Please, I just need some water. I'll lose the baby. Please, don't hurt the baby. She was counting on the one thing she knew about this world: legacy. Harming a random woman was one thing. Harming the potential heir to the Viscari Empire, that was a different, more complicated sin. Paolo looked at her. His eyes narrowed. He was debating. He looked at his men. Is this a joke? Please, she wept, playing the part. He'll kill you for this. But if you let me go, if the baby's safe, maybe he'll show you mercy. Paolo was rattled. This had complicated his plan. Get her some water, he snapped at one of the guards, and tie her to the chair. And you... Shut up. The guard, a young, nervous-looking kid, grabbed her arm. He was rough. Don't hurt her, you idiot, Paolo shouted. The baby! She had done it. She had bought herself time, and she had planted a seed of fear in her captors. She just had to hold on. Dominic was coming. The raid was not a negotiation. It was an invasion. Dominic didn't give Paolo a chance to surrender. He and his team, 12 men dressed in black, moved through the abandoned fish packing plant like ghosts in the pouring night rain. They took out the 2 lookouts on the roof without a sound. Dominic was the first one through the side door. He moved with a predatory grace that was terrifying. This was not the businessman. This was the monster from the alley. Unleashed. He found the main warehouse. He saw her. She was tied to a chair. Paolo was pacing in front of her, his phone to his ear, probably trying to make a deal. 2 other guards were in the room. Dominic didn't wait. He didn't announce himself. He emerged from the shadows. Paolo, he said. His cousin spun around, his face pale with shock. Dominic, I was just... Paolo's 2 guards went for their guns. They never cleared the holsters. Vinny and 2 other men were on them, disarming them with a series of brutal, efficient strikes. It was over in seconds. Paolo, desperate, grabbed Alyssa, yanking her out of the chair and pressing a gun to her temple. Hello, cousin, Paolo sneered, his voice shaking. I told you. You're soft. This is what makes you weak. Let her go, Paolo, Dominic said, his voice pure ice. He stood in the middle of the room, his gun at his side, not raised. He was a picture of calm. Or you'll what? Paolo laughed, a high, panicked sound. You shoot me, she dies. All this, for a broken-down waitress from the slums. Alyssa was bruised. She was terrified, but she was not broken. She looked at Dominic, and he gave her the smallest, almost imperceptible nod. Trust me. She did what she had done before. She created a diversion. He's right, she screamed, not at Dominic, but at Paolo. I'm nobody, but the baby is. I'm pregnant, you idiot. Paolo, who had already been rattled by the lie, flinched. His grip on her loosened for a fraction of a second. Shut up, he yelled. It was all Dominic needed. He didn't fire his gun. He lunged. He crossed the 20 feet between them in a blur of motion. He was not a boss. He was a panther. He crashed into Paolo, slamming his own shoulder into the hand that held the gun. The weapon skittered across the concrete floor. Paolo screamed and swung at him. It wasn't a fight, it was an execution. Dominic, fueled by weeks of fear and a lifetime of rage, hit his cousin. It was a close combat, explosive and brutal assault. He hit him once in the gut, doubling him over, and then with a strike to the jaw that snapped his head back. Alyssa scrambled away, falling behind a stack of old pallets. Dominic had Paolo on the ground, his fist raised for the last, final, killing blow. "Dominic!" Alyssa screamed. Her voice cut through the red haze. He froze, his fist trembling. He looked at his bloody knuckles, at his cousin's broken, gasping form, and then at her. She was there, bruised, but alive. He got to his feet, a shuddering breath rattling his chest. "Vinny," Dominic said, his voice hoarse. "Boss." Vinny was at his side. "Get her," Dominic said, not taking his eyes off Paolo. Vinny gently helped Alyssa to her feet. "You're okay, kid." Just then, they heard it, a distant wailing sound. Sirens. "Boss," Vinny said, his head snapping toward the door. "That guard, the kid who got her the water. He must have bolted and called the cops." "We're gone," Dominic said. He looked at Paolo. "Leave him. Let the police have what's left." He turned and walked to Alyssa. He didn't speak. He just wrapped one arm around her waist, pulling her tight against his side, and put his other hand on the back of her head, shielding her. "I've got you," he whispered. He led her out a back entrance, into the driving rain, just as the first red and blue lights flickered against the warehouse walls. A black SUV was waiting, its engine humming. They piled in and fled, speeding away from the docks, the sirens fading behind them. "Where are we going?" Alyssa whispered, her head on his shoulder, his arm a steel bar around her. "Somewhere safe," Dominic said, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. "A hideout in the hills. No one knows about it. No one. Not even Vinny." The SUV was cold, the rain lashing against the tinted windows, but inside, Alyssa felt nothing but the radiating heat from Dominic's body. He had not let go of her once. His arm was a steel band around her waist, his other hand still tangled in her damp hair, holding her head to his shoulder as if he were afraid she might dissolve. She was in shock. The adrenaline that had allowed her to lie, to fight, to think in that warehouse was now gone, leaving a hollow, vibrating terror in its place. They drove for nearly an hour, climbing up a winding, treacherous road into the hills she never knew existed outside the city. The rain finally slowed to a drizzle, and a thick fog enveloped the car. Swallowing the headlights, Marco, his driver, had been dismissed. Dominic was driving himself, his movements sharp and controlled, one-handed, his other arm still locked around her. He finally pulled off the main road, onto a gravel path so hidden by overgrown trees that it was invisible. After another 5 minutes, a structure emerged from the mist. It wasn't a house. It was a bunker, a low-slung, modern box of concrete and dark glass built into the side of the hill, overlooking a sheer drop. The garage door opened silently, and he pulled the SUV inside. The world went utterly quiet. "We're safe here," he said, his voice a rough, exhausted rasp. He finally let go of her, but only to get out and open her door. No one knows this place exists. He didn't carry her, but he supported her, his arm returning to her waist, guiding her into the house. Inside, it was the opposite of the cold exterior. The floors were heated stone, the furniture was deep and covered in soft wool, and a massive, unlit fireplace dominated one wall. The entire back wall was a single pane of glass, looking out over the fog-shrouded valley. It was a fortress, but it was a home. He sat her on a deep, plush sofa. "Wait," he commanded, his voice gentle. He disappeared and returned moments later with a heavy wool blanket, which he wrapped around her shoulders, and a first aid kit. He knelt in front of her. The cold, brutal boss from the warehouse was gone, replaced by the man from the sunlit bedroom. "You're shaking," he whispered. He gently took her hands. The rope from the chair had left her wrists raw and red. He took a cloth from the kit, poured antiseptic on it. It stung, and began to clean the abrasions with a touch so delicate it was agonizing. Did he hurt you anywhere else?" Dominic asked, his voice thick, his eyes fixed on her wrists, unable to meet hers. He was ashamed. He had failed in his promise. "My cheek," she whispered. He looked up. The bruise from when Paolo had first grabbed her, slamming her against the warehouse wall, was dark and ugly. He didn't touch it. Not yet. He finished bandaging her wrists, his movements slow and methodical, Then he looked at his own hands. His knuckles were split and caked with his cousin's blood. "You're hurt," she said, her voice small. "It's nothing. Let me," she insisted. She took the cloth and the bottle from his hands, her own still trembling. She knelt on the floor in front of him, so they were eye to eye. She began to clean his wounds. He didn't gasp when the antiseptic hit the broken skin. A sharp intake of breath. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't be," he said, his voice raw. She was tending his wounds. He was tending hers, the physical and the emotional. They were two survivors in a concrete box, high above the world that was trying to tear them apart. When she was finished, her hands lingered on his. She looked at his bruised knuckles, then up at his face. She saw the exhaustion, the self-loathing, the terror he had hidden behind his rage, and the dam inside her, the one that had been holding back the reality of the last 3 hours, just broke. It started with a single hitched breath, a tear. Then a sob, ripped from her chest, a sound of pure, animal terror. She fell forward, burying her face in his shoulder, and she wept. She wept for the girl in the alley, for the woman in the motel, for the body on the warehouse floor, and for the life she was so terrified of losing, not because it was hers, but because he was in it. I thought he was going to," she choked out. "I thought you wouldn't. I thought I was—" "Shh," Dominic said, his arms coming around her, crushing her to him. He held her, his eyes squeezed shut, rocking her gently on the stone floor. "I'm here. I've got you. I'm so sorry, Alyssa. I'm so sorry." She sobbed in his arms for a long time, until she was empty, until there was nothing left but a raw, aching exhaustion. She pulled her head back, her face a mess of tears and smudged makeup. She looked at him, this powerful, dangerous man who was on his knees, his face etched with pain, not for himself, but for her. Her gratitude, her relief, her fierce, desperate love for him, all crested at once. She didn't just kiss him. She lunged at him. She grabbed his face with both her hands, her fingers digging into his jaw, and pulled him to her. It was a fierce, raw, desperate kiss. It was a kiss of survival. It was a kiss that said, "You're alive, and I'm alive, and we are here." It was a kiss of pure, unadulterated gratitude. He responded instantly, his mouth taking hers, his hands tangling in her hair, pulling her impossibly closer. He groaned, a sound of anguish and relief, and the kiss deepened, becoming something else. It wasn't Gallaret a reclaiming. It was a healing. He lifted her, his arms under her legs, and carried her from the living room, never breaking the kiss. He took her to the bedroom, a simple, dark room with another massive window, and laid her on the bed. They made love again. But it was not the sun-drenched, tender exploration of their first time. It was the desperate, profound, and necessary act of two people confirming they were still alive. It was the frantic press of skin against skin, a physical vow that the world would not break them. It was his hands on her, tracing every part of her, assuring himself she was whole. It was her hands on him, holding him, grounding him, forgiving him. It was a passionate, wordless conversation, a desperate affirmation of life in the face of death. Afterward, they lay tangled, not in sheets, but in the heavy wool blanket he had brought her. The fog outside the window was so thick it looked like they were floating in a cloud. He was holding her, his heart pounding a slow, steady rhythm under her ear. "You lied to him," Dominic whispered into her hair. She smiled against his chest. "What? You're not pregnant." "It's the only thing I could think of," she said. I knew. Even a man like that, a baby, a legacy, it would make him pause. He pulled back, his eyes full of a new, profound awe. "I've been trying to keep you safe, and you were in that warehouse, saving yourself. You were saving me. You gave me the time I needed. We saved each other," she whispered. He shook his head, his expression turning serious, pained. "Vinny warned me. He said you were a distraction. He said you were my weakness. That's what Paolo thought. That's what I let them all think." He sat up, pulling her with him. He held her face, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones. He was wrong. Vinny was wrong. I was wrong. His voice was thick with a confession that went deeper than words. You are not my distraction. Alyssa, you are my clarity. You are not my weakness. You are the only part of me that is strong. Running my empire, that's easy. It's just habit. But loving you, that's the first real, terrifying, honest thing I have ever done. You're not my reason to be weak. You're my reason to change. It was the most honest, vulnerable thing he had ever said. Alyssa felt her own heart swell. She saw the path he was offering, a safe, protected life in his golden cage. I don't want to be your reason for anything, Dominic, she said, her voice suddenly strong. He looked confused. What? I don't want to be saved anymore. I don't want to be the reason you change. I'm not a project. She took his hands, his bloody, powerful hands. I'm not your weakness, and I'm not your strength. I'm just me, and I love you, but I can't be the woman you hide in a bunker. She took a breath. I don't want saving. I want a chance to build something. Together. He stared at her. He had offered her his world, and she had countered by demanding her own. A slow smile spread across his face. It was the first true, unguarded smile she had ever seen. You want to build something with me? I'm not going to be your consigliere, she said. But I'm not going to be your kept woman either. You want to change? You want to be legitimate? Then be it. You can't do that by hiding in the hills. He nodded, his eyes alight with an idea. Paolo, he's in police custody. They'll charge him with the assault on Leo and Sal, but they'll have to let him go. The charges won't stick. The Rinaldis will pay his bail. He'll be out in 2 days, thinking he's won, thinking he exposed me, that he made me run. So what do we do? Alyssa asked. We go back, Dominic said, a new, cold energy in his voice. We go back tomorrow. We don't hide, and we give him exactly what he wants. They returned to the city 2 days later, just as Dominic had predicted. Paolo, his face bruised but his smile smug, had been released, the charges dropped for lack of evidence. Dominic called a meeting, not in his office, not in a warehouse. He called it in the main dining room of Il Corvo, in the middle of the afternoon. He summoned every captain, every lieutenant, every man who mattered, and he made them wait. When he finally entered, he wasn't alone. Alyssa was on his arm. She wasn't in a black dress. She was in a sharp, cream-colored suit, her hair pulled back, the bruise on her cheek visible for all to see. She was not a victim. She was a statement. A ripple of shock went through the room. My cousin, Paolo, Dominic said, his voice quiet, but it carried in the dead silent room. He's a man of tradition. He believes I have become weak, that my interests in legitimate business, he said, squeezing Alyssa's hand, have made me soft. He walked to the head of the main table. He was so convinced of this that he sold my shipping manifest to the Rinaldis. He was so convinced that he sold her location to them, Dominic said, his voice dropping. He orchestrated the attack that nearly killed Leo. He kidnapped and assaulted the woman I love. He looked at Paolo, who was sweating. He thought this would destabilize me, Dominic said. He was wrong. He has only focused me. Dominic looked at his captains. This is the old way. This is the way of our fathers. Scraps and blood feuds and back-alley betrayals. It is a dying business. Paolo, he is the past. He is a rat, clinging to a sinking ship. He then looked at Alyssa, his expression softening, visible to all his men. This, he said, is the future. Legitimacy. Power that you don't have to hide. Money that you don't have to wash. I am restructuring. From this day on, Vescari Imports is Vescari Holdings. The warehouses will be converted. The old ways are done. He turned his gaze back to Paolo, and his face went as cold as the grave. You, he said, are a betrayal. You are a ghost. You are no longer family. You are no longer welcome in this city. You are exiled. You will be taken to the airport with the clothes on your back. If I ever see your face again, if I ever hear your name, I will not be so merciful. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. It was a public execution. He had not used violence. He had used power. Paolo, broken and humiliated, was taken away. Dominic Vescari had not only defeated a rival, he had redefined his entire empire, and he had done it with Alyssa at his side. 6 months later, the Sunrise Cafe opened its doors. It was a small, bright shop on a corner in a quiet, respectable neighborhood. It had clean wooden tables, a large, sunny window, and the smell of fresh-baked bread and strong coffee. Dominic had given her the startup capital, a check she had insisted was a loan, with a formal interest rate and a repayment plan. It was his silent financial support. But the cafe, every inch of it was hers. She'd designed the logo. She'd hired the staff. She'd chosen the blends. She was behind the counter, laughing with an elderly man, handing him a latte and a scone. She wore a simple white apron, her hair tied up. She looked happy. She looked whole. She glanced up, wiping her hands on her apron, and looked out the window. He was there. He was standing across the street, just as he had stood outside the alley of the Rusty Anchor all those months ago. He was in a black coat, his hands in his pockets. He was not a shadow. He was not a savior. He was just a man, watching the woman he loved, and he was smiling, a soft, genuine smile of pure pride. Their eyes met. Alyssa handed the apron to her employee. "Take the register," she said. She walked out of her cafe, and stepped onto the busy sidewalk. The sun was warm on her face. He met her in the middle of the street, the city traffic flowing around them, a world they had built together. She stepped into his arms, and he held her. It was not a rescue. It was not a protection. It was a choice. He didn't save her because she was weak. He saved her because he knew, given the chance, she'd rise. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We truly hope you enjoyed this journey with Alyssa and Dominic. We would love to hear from you, so please drop a comment below and let us know where in the world you're listening from. Your thoughts and feedback mean everything to us. If you love this story, please don't forget to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories for more tales of danger, passion, and redemption.